Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Can somebody say something? All right, on the chat. Anyway, I'll just keep going. My name is Alicja Rogalska, and I'm a London-based artist. And I'll be doing an artist talk today, which I'm hoping to be more of a conversation. I just wanted to thank Centrala for inviting me to do this talk during this quite surreal time. And thank you all for coming to listen. I'm sure you're probably experiencing digital fatigue at the moment, so I'm very happy to have some listeners. Okay, great. You can hear me. Fabulous. So the visuals you see are a documentation of my previous projects, and the talk will be structured around questions, so you can ask me questions in the chat. I will maybe first introduce my practice, just in general terms. I mostly work in context and in collaboration with other people on issues usually concerning social and political structures and the everyday aspects of them. And in my most recent projects, I've been investigating future imaginaries as well. So this time we're experiencing now is quite a difficult, but also quite an important moment to pause and think about where we want to move on from this crisis. In terms of just to let you know how long the talk is going to be, the maximum will be about 50 minutes. And I've got also some video works that I will show you, just some clips, because most of them are actually available online on my Vimeo channel. Okay, just to get started, maybe I'll try by showing you one of my first videos, which was done in collaboration with a folk group. And actually, interestingly, this is a project that I did just after graduating. So it was 2011, and I was invited to residency in a small village in Warsaw. In south of Warsaw, in a small village, near Warsaw.
Kiedy się robiło, powiedzie w polu też, dziś gwoździami fabryki zabito, bezrobocie duże jest. Dziś gwoździami fabryki zabito, bezrobocie duże jest. Prywaciarze czasem pracę dają, na czarno robota wre. Ludzie jabłka rwią, zioła zbierają. Wczoraj kasa, dziś już nie. Ludzie jabłka rwią, zioła zbierają. Wczoraj kasa, dziś już nie. Młodzi ciągle siedzą w internecie, różne szkoły kończą nam. Urząd Pracy radzi im w powiecie, jedźcie Anglia, Włochy, świat. Urząd Pracy radzi im w powiecie, jedźcie Anglia, Włochy, świat.
Okay, I think I'm afraid we can't do much about the noise. We've got quite a precarious technical setup here between London and Birmingham, and it was all fine when we did our tests. I hope you can still hear me, despite the sound difficulties. Just to go back to the clip from the video that you showed, that we showed you. This was one of the first projects that I did in collaboration with others, because I graduated in 2011, and when I was studying at Goldsmiths for my MFA, I actually really wanted to become a sculptor, but weirdly enough, immediately after graduating, I gave up on that idea and went back to my cultural studies roots and decided to work more closely with communities and groups of people and individuals. Okay, somebody says it's better now. Fabulous. I just moved the mic, so maybe that's the way. So the reason why I wanted to show you this video is because it was kind of a turning point in my practice for me. My background is actually in cultural studies and in cultural animation, so I did many kind of community-based and education projects before studying fine art, and then kind of decided that this was a way of making art that I actually found the most interesting and the most fulfilling, because I just spent 2 years trying to make things in a studio, which was great, but also quite frustrating and lonely. So since then, I've been developing projects, inviting people to join me on various investigations, because my projects are often they have an element of research in them. So I don't necessarily know what the outcome will be. I set up a kind of structure and framework, and then there is always obviously the unknown and also space for other people to contribute and change the project. So it's quite process-led as well, the way I work. Okay, so let's maybe have a look at some other videos. But just to go back to the song, the Broniov song, the way it came about was me going on this residency to a small village and deciding to work on the local issues, that like what people are actually struggling with, what they find important, and that was mostly the economic situation at the time, because it was an area of Poland with really high unemployment. And also the whole area had a very good, strong folk music tradition. So I approached one of the singing groups and asked them if they wanted to work with me on writing a new folk song. So the idea was to kind of juxtapose this kind of folklore idea of, frozen time, the past being kind of reenacted, and actually doing something about the now and, what people are actually dealing with on an everyday basis. Let's try maybe we're still waiting for questions. I haven't prepared any lecture, so, it would really help if you could ask me some. But before we do that, I would like to show you another video, which is called Dreamed Revolution, which was a commission by Muzeum
Są
Sztuki.
szczęśliwi, żyją w małej społeczności, mają dobre miejsca. Są szczęśliwi, żyją w małej społeczności, mają dobre miejsca do życia, pracy jest mało, ale wygląda zupełnie inaczej niż teraz. Myślę, że wszyscy mniej więcej żyją na podobnym poziomie.
Łódź jest obrośnięta dżunglą i są szczęśliwi.
Znalazłem miejsce, w którym ludzie się przemieszczają. Właściwie wszyscy ludzie się przemieszczają, nikt nie mieszka na stałe. Jest to jedna wielka linia przesyłowa we wszystkie możliwe strony, pod szklanym dachem, który faktycznie jest zarośnięty roślinnością, bujną zieloną. Nie wiem, czy to jest naturalna roślinność, czy roślinność, która została stworzona tak, by ograniczyć widoczność miasta dla ludzi, którzy są w tych liniach przesyłowych, gdzieś płyną. Być może zaczęliśmy żyć w ruchu.
Ale możemy też latać. Jest taki specjalny pas, który się zapina i on jest sztywny na klatce piersiowej. Po prostu unosimy się w powietrzu, lecimy poziomo.
Okay, so this was a piece from 2014, commissioned by MuseumsQuartier and Teatr Nowy in Łódź in Poland. And basically it's another kind of turning point really in my work, because the subject of the commission was avant-garde and socialist realism, and the idea was for contemporary artists to look at the legacy of both art and social movements, and see what the relevance of them could be today. And I, after many months of research, I've decided that actually what was really interesting to me in relation to contemporary world was the lack of thinking about the future that was really present at the time of avant-garde, the first wave of avant-garde art and socialist realism, and the utopian ideas that were basically prevalent. Anything from building a new type of architecture to new forms of social relations and new type of subjectivity. So I was wondering how we could kind of think and talk about the future today, and where the utopian thinking was located, which is why I decided to collaborate with activists on this project, because I thought that if anybody is interested in changing the world, it will be them. And the question was, how do we actually access the kind of long-term thinking? Because if you're an activist, you usually work on very kind of short-term, small goals. And I wanted to kind of think more about the long-term visions and ideas and political desires. And I started investigating different ways in which you can access those that are not kind of based on a kind of rational thinking, or a form of a panel discussion, or which kind of limits the ideas to what's possible, really. So I wanted to know about the kind of impossible desires. So I came to the conclusion that I'd like to do actually a hypnotic show with the activists, and ask them to travel 100 years into the future, so quite far on the scale of activist activity, and talk about the world that they can see. So it was a kind of experiment. First of all, I didn't know whether anybody would actually agree to participate in a kind of public hypnosis session where you have audience and you are on stage and you hypnotize. It was, quite a risky thing to do, but it did happen, like you can see in the video, which is basically based on documentation of that event. Quite a few people also from the audience were taking part on stage, and I really didn't know what would the outcome would be. So there were questions that I asked via the hypnotist to the participants, but actually a lot of them were not answered, and there were other things that appeared. So it was an experiment in utopian thinking, and also trying to kind of access different types of affect and emotional engagement with this idea of the future. And what's interesting is that a lot of the ideas that came through were very similar to the kind of old utopian ideas from the beginning of the 20th century. It seemed like this was a kind of blueprint for whatever we can think now. So that's another example of a project I did. I'm still waiting for your questions, but if there are none, we can maybe carry on. Let's see what we've got there. Okay. Maybe we do it chronologically. So the same year in 2014, I worked on another project in Poland called TATE. It's a collaboration. Sorry, it's a collaboration with Łukasz Surowiec, another artist from Poland. Okay, so I can see some questions that I will answer in a minute, but just to go back to the TATE, it was actually... Oh, we don't need to show the video again. Sorry. Okay. Basically, it was a shop, or it was not a shop because you couldn't buy anything, but it was a space on a high street in Lublin in southeast Poland, where people could come, members of the public, anybody could come and cry and sell the tears for cash. So basically, our idea was to spend the project budget on tears, and it was all about affective labor and emotional labor and things we do for money, and how the kind of post-Fordist changes in the work structure in the different industries that appeared meant that we need to perform for money, and usually the emotional performance means we need to be nice to other people. If we work in the service industry, that's very important. And actually, there's no space for the kind of the sadness or the despair or the anxieties that the late capitalist world is definitely generating. So this was a kind of weird space in between the kind of intimacy of crying and a kind of communal aspect of perhaps mourning of something that is gone. And yeah, we had to close the shop early because it was hugely popular, and we had over 200 people come and use it for various reasons, not just because of the financial aspect, but also as a kind of as a protest, I suppose. Some of the people, or as therapy as well. So just to kind of highlight that I like in my projects, I like when they have a kind of dual or even more aspects, so they're not just representative, but they also have another function perhaps in the world outside of the art world. Just to go back to the questions, I believe they were about Dreamed Revolution. What kind of questions were you asking? Did you use trigger words to try and get more utopian ideas? That's a question from Andrew, thank you. So the questions were quite simple. The activists who were hypnotized were asked what they see. So first of all, there was the whole kind of ritual to get people into trance. And then we all arrived in one specific park in the city of Łódź, where they were from. And people kind of departed from that place. So it was quite spatial in a sense. And then the questions varied from what they see, basically, like what does the future look like, to what people do, what does like education look like, what are the relationships between people, how about the economy, what is the relationship to nature. So there were not even maybe specific questions, but more like subject areas and that were meant to trigger some responses. But yeah, some of the ideas were actually not that utopian. There were also quite a few dystopian visions of this kind of hyper technocratic future where it's just difficult to move about, and when your movement is constricted because of the severe global warming and the kind of surveillance societies has taken over. So there were lots of different visions in a way. I was more interested in utopian ideas, but it doesn't mean that anything else was excluded, because it wasn't. It was just whatever people could see in their visions. And actually, what was interesting about this project is that not everybody was hypnotized, but because of the structure of the event, it meant that people could say things that they wouldn't normally maybe say. They wouldn't maybe admit to having those desires, but because it was this kind of weird hypnosis session, it was possible. So that was also the idea was also to create a platform for that, as opposed to thinking about some genuine, like essence of somebody's dreams. It was more to do with what's how the kind of radicality in thinking has been eradicated from the kind of spaces of discussion and knowledge production or political debate. So that was one of the kind of ideas behind the project as well. Okay, Bojana is asking what pulls you into making work about your culture, which I'm guessing is more about maybe the Broniów song, which is where you see the kind of traditional song and also a traditional singing group. I don't actually know if I make work about my culture. I suppose the examples I've shown you so far were primarily from Poland, because for a few years I did a lot of work in Poland just after I graduated. And I would say obviously where I come from is a really important aspect of who I am. So obviously that kind of comes through in my work. I grew up in a small village myself, on a small farm in the northeast. So those issues are very close to heart for me, and then the changes in the kind of economic structure. But yeah, I wouldn't say, like you were seeing in the other examples, that I work in many different contexts, in different locations as well. So even though I obviously carry my identity and my culture around, it's not the only kind of focus of my work, because I'm more interested in, as cheesy as it might sound, in human nature in general, as opposed to focusing on cultural differences, because I think there is more that unifies us than divides us in general. Okay, so we've got more questions, which is exciting. How did you advertise the TATE selling to potential participants? The plan was to have flyers. We were actually quite busy just setting up the shop. This was quite run down, so it took days and days to renovate it and make it look. We wanted it to look professional, like something between a bank and a beauty salon, and I don't know. But we wanted it to have this kind of professional look, like it's a business of some kind, even though the whole idea was to spend the money rather than make the money. So we kind of didn't think about the participants because of that, because of the time pressure, and literally last minute decided to make flyers, and also just hand them out in the city center, because the location was not that central. But what happened was, just the day or the day before we were opening, a press release was sent by the curator of the project to different TV stations and newspapers. And the next day we were basically inundated with the media. So all the main TV stations from Poland turned up, and the main newspapers, because there was something, I suppose, in the description or in the idea that was really compelling, and it also sort of played a little bit into this stereotype of contemporary artists doing those crazy things, and look, they're buying tears, and it's a very kind of media friendly project, which we didn't really think about or consider. So that meant that no advertising was necessary, because we were literally inundated with people coming from all over who saw it on the internet. It also became viral on Facebook and Twitter and so on. So people were kind of coming just to see if it was for real, because it sounded a bit like that it might not be a real existing like space. And once the TV stations started showing the reports from the place, it was just we didn't need any advertising. Quite the opposite. We had to close early, and quite a few people were quite disappointed, because they came a long way just to cry. And actually, quite a few people did cry, even though we did tell them we can't pay them anymore, but they didn't mind, because it was more about kind of having that space, which is public, which is about a display of a different kind of emotions that we usually are confined to the private space. So yes, that's Tia Dealer. What was the next thing I wanted to show you? Let me let me have a think. I don't remember now what was it. Okay, so maybe just following on the Broniów song. Okay, one more question from Andrew. Did you explain the link to emotional performance in everyday relations under capitalism? If so, how did people react to that? And what was the mood like over the day? Did it fluctuate? So everybody was, thanks to Jaina, everybody was aware of the fact that it was an art project, and we had a kind of short description about it. So as you entered, you were people were informed what it was and what we were interested in, and in a way, like, we didn't necessarily explain the theoretical underpinning of it to everybody coming in, but what was interesting was that people really got it in a way. So we had, for example, a woman working in a shop who came and said that she had a really bad day at work. People rude to her, and her boss was terrible, and yet she had to smile and be polite to all the customers all day. And actually, the one thing she wanted to do all day was cry. So she came to that space to cry for money after, being nice and smiley and performing the kind of positivity all day. So in a way, that connection was quite intuitively made by most people. And in terms of the mood, it really depended on the groups of people. So there were sometimes there were whole families that turned up to cry together, and sometimes it was groups of friends, and they're treating it a bit like a crying party. Some people were getting competitive and trying to beat the others at crying, but it kind of created, because most people were fragile and vulnerable, despite the fact that they used onion to make themselves cry. Most people did. There were different techniques, but onion was the successful one. But there's something that happens to you when you cry, even if it's mechanical, and you become kind of more vulnerable. So there was definitely this kind of feeling of community, of strangers talking to each other and supporting each other and giving each other tips at how to cry more, and and just striking conversations. So it was really quite an intense space as well to be in, but also quite supportive in that way. But there were lots of jokes, and it was quite funny as well, which you might not see in the video, which is on purpose a little bit manipulative, just like the whole project. Okay. Besides utopia, dystopia, are there any philosophical themes in your practice? That's a question from Brianna. I've done quite a few projects around the issues of migration, mostly after the Brexit vote, obviously. Being a migrant myself, found it quite an impossible subject to ignore. Maybe it's a good opportunity to watch a clip from a video called What If As If, which I did with...
When did immigration law came into existence? How did it come into existence? Who created it? When did this imaginary line appear that this country is this and that country is that? Because they didn't give them visa before they take my ancestor to America. No.
But the problem is people were not treated as humans. They were things.
Commodity.
Yes, yes. I read a book by Stefan Zweig when he traveled in the late 1900s and before the First World War. He didn't even have a passport.
Yes.
Probably in a way it was also the means of travel. It was more difficult really to travel to other countries. Maybe that's why people stuck to the area they grew up in. Maybe that's why it was not such an issue. I don't know.
In West Africa now, there's no
Okay, so this
immigration
was.
law.
Oh,
So you
sorry.
can-
Okay. So this was a fragment of a video I did in 2017. I collaborated with a group of lawyers who are also immigrants, asylum seekers, refugees, or migrants with a precarious status in the UK. And it was done for an exhibition in Berlin, which was called Dreams and Dramas, Law as Literature. So it was a commission. And it was about, the whole exhibition was about artists using and misusing law in the practice. And when I was doing research, it was just after the Brexit referendum, really, when I started working on this. I discovered a thing called legal fiction, which was quite a shocking discovery to me. So especially in common law countries, there is this thing called legal fiction, where it's a device that is used when there is no provision in law for a situation, and some law needs to be applied. So the idea of legal fiction is that you assume that something is true, even though you know it isn't, or you actually don't know what the truth is. So I was interested in that idea as a kind of because it sort of exposes the gaps in the law, and exposes the law itself as a structure, as a social structure, as a thing that is imperfect. And I wanted to work with people who in their lives have been exposed to immigration law, so they kind of have both the emotional response to that, to immigration law, but also the knowledge that comes from their training as lawyers, because I was interested in more of the kind of philosophical idea behind this. So this was just a fragment of the video. You can watch it on Vimeo. But basically, I asked the lawyers to think about first, like what are the legal fictions in immigration law, and actually when you start taking it apart, even the idea of a border or citizenship could be deemed a fiction itself. And then actually in the second part of the video, they are asked to come up with new legal fictions. So in a way, this was a kind of a project that tried to, or attempted to, look at immigration on one hand as this idea, like what is immigration, what are the legal aspects of it, when did it actually become a thing, but also what is the utopian potential in those kind of gaps and cracks in the law, where legal fictions appear, and what could be the potential of fiction itself in the law. What could it be? For like emancipatory politics in the future. So this is my attempt to build on several strands in my work, really. Maybe I'll show you another video which is kind of following on that, which I worked on in Ljubljana last year, actually, so it's quite recent. And it's a project that was a collaboration with a group of people in Slovenia who were erased after Slovenia seceded from former Yugoslavia in 1992. The idea behind this project was to kind of investigate how a very simple, administrative change could, what kind of violence can it do? Like what is the violence of administration? Because in a way, what happened was obviously around Slovenia at the time, a brutal war was happening. So in a way, that this was a kind of maybe an overlooked event, what happened, a type of sort of ethnic cleansing that wasn't based on actual violence of killing someone, but nevertheless the violence was still there in the act. So basically the video that is one of the outcomes of the project is called the Aliens Act. You can actually see, I think, on the slideshow now some stills as well from that video. But for the purpose of this project, I asked people the people that experienced the erasure to imagine a kind of national costume of some kind that they would wear as the erased, as people who were left without citizenship, basically, or a kind of costume that would not explain but visualize the experience that they went through. So maybe we can play the Aliens Act fragment of that video.
Zelo mlada sem prišla tukaj delala do 91, ko sem šla na porodniško k staršem. Zelo mlada sem prišla tukaj delala do 91, ko sem šla na porodniško k staršem. In v tem času se je most porušil med Bosno in Hrvaško. Tako da sem zamudila in sem dobila odpoved od službe. Za državljanstvo mi je prišlo 92, med tem časom pa jaz nisem mogla več nazaj v Ljubljano. Pač vojna se je tudi v Bosni začela, tako da sem zamudila to. 93 sem prišla, ker sem bila še na zavodu za podpisati državljanstvo, pa mi niso več dovolili. Mi je tista delavka rekla, naj grem na socialno vložiti vlogo za podporo. In ko me je poklicala not socialna delavka, pa sem dala tisto vlogo, ja, prokvajča furka, a bi hotela na račun države živeti. Ja.
Izbris je na našo družino vplival tako, da je bilo konstantno čutiti nek pritisk. Recimo, policaji so hodili na dom preverjati, če je oče tam.
Če sem policijo videl, sem vedel, kaj se bo zgodilo, in sem bežal od njih do samega vraga, ne? Da me ne bi deportirali v Bosni, na Hrvaško.
Okay, so this is another strand in my work, which is looking into migration, immigration, and the kind of legal aspects of it, and also like the effects on the individual bodies, and how, especially when you see, there's this one costume that Irfan was wearing in that video with the barbed wire, which really was quite poignant in terms of like the moving of borders onto our skins at the moment, which is, you know, happening everywhere. That borders is no longer a kind of physical thing that is somewhere located geographically on land, but now we became the borders because of the surveillance, and you know, even most countries now, the sort of border agents are active as much on the outside as inside. So that was really kind of strong metaphor, but also it referred to the refugee crisis, really, because the work was focused on the testimonies and the stories from 1990s, but there is a very real kind of link to what's happening on the borders of Europe now, and the actual real barbed wire that appeared a few years ago within, you know, on the borders of Europe and within European Union, as an attempt to stop migrants entering. So that I just found that quite a strong kind of metaphor and a strong visual representation of that, of the time that we live in. And okay, more questions. Do you think that you will make any work about the current crisis, the virus, I'm not sure I will make work about it, but because it's a bit too early. I don't know about you, but I'm still processing what it means for everyone, for me, for different countries, for the world. And I feel like, there needs to be more time to kind of understand the full impact of it. I'm not sure I would necessarily want to make work about it, but it will definitely influence whatever I do in the future, because the future will never be the same. I don't think, and we don't know what it's going to bring. But what we know is that all sorts of things started to be that used to be like impossible started to appear possible. I'm talking about there's like support from the government and the kind of focus on like what is skilled work and who are the skilled workers or key workers at the moment, and the appreciation of occupations that were completely ignored and not respected in any way, and also the focus on care and the community, and how the sort of from individual bodies we suddenly became this totally connected global body somehow that is sick at the moment. And it's just there are many things there that obviously will influence my work in the future, and I'm sure other artists' work, but I wouldn't like sit now and try and come up with an idea of a project about the virus. I think I'm kind of taking this opportunity in a way. It's a weird word to use, but because I had to stop doing what I was doing. So a lot of my projects were postponed or cancelled. So in a way that it is a kind of opportunity to stop and think about what you do more in depth. So I think that as a condition is in itself very interesting and very necessary. I started rethinking what social means in, when you work with other people and you use the term social practice, what is social practice in when we all isolated, and when the ultimate solidarity is about not seeing anyone and not being around other bodies. What does it do to us as a society? It's all those questions are kind of are going to enter, I think, my work and also the wider community. Okay, so I've got one more question from Harun. Hi, Harun. How do you think commissioning arts organizations could better support research-based practice in the UK? It's a very good question, especially in today, talking about support when many people were left without any kind of support. I think maybe focusing on maybe less focus on outcome and supporting artists' development. I was very lucky enough to access some opportunities that allowed me just that allowed me the time to not to produce another piece of work, but to actually think or research or try new things that wouldn't then have to be showcased. And I think that's something that's quite rare in terms of the UK arts funding and the way it works, but also other places. So I think that's a very important that would be a very important step to kind of maybe stop the fetishizing productivity, which I think the current situation is forcing, and start thinking about the process and the thinking. And I think what if anything is gained through this crisis is the fact that we all needed to stop what we were doing and think about the value of what we were doing, including the arts, and what does it do to the community? How do you contribute? You know, what is it important? What is important? I think we're all revaluing and recalibrating what these things meant. So I think we running out of time, but I wanted to just show you maybe one more quick video clip, because going back to Bojana's question, a lot of my work in the past, but I'm still interested and invested in the subject, was about issues of labor and work in general, which also like Teardila was partly about. But this is a project I did, it was a long-term project I did in 2017 and 18 in Jersey with migrant workers, primarily Polish workers, because of the language. I could engage with them a bit more, and you could see in the slideshows lots of lots of potato images. So this was a project with potato workers, and it's called the Royals because of the Royal Jersey potatoes, basically.
Warunki pracy poprawiają się jedynie wtedy, kiedy jest mało chętnych do jakiejś pracy, czyli jest większy popyt na pracownika niż podaż. Jak tutaj przyjeżdżaliśmy parę lat temu tabunami, to oni sobie wybierali na tego węgałka, najniższe stawki dawali.
No płaca jest najniższa, no.
Nikt się nie upomina. Kto się upomni?
A nie macie związku zawodowego?
Nie.
Co tego nie przeszło chyba?
Chyba nie.
No. Związek zawodowy w Jersey.
Raczej nie.
To by nie przeszło. Byłoby nie podoba się jeść do Polski.
Jaki powinien być dobry pracodawca?
Miły człowiek, dobry, uczciwy, warunki mieszkaniowe porządne, płaci dużo więcej niż płacą w spółce.
Uczciwy po pierwsze.
Nigdy się nie czeka, nigdy nie krzyczy.
Idealnie, to ja ci powiem tak, dychę na godzinę, jakby dali.
I mogą tobą orać w polu.
Okay, so this was, I did those workshops with, series of workshops with migrant workers where I asked them to make clay potatoes because that's what they handle potatoes every day. And the idea was to talk about the labor conditions at the same time. So the video was actually made for a farming conference because the workers were not invited to the conference. So this was a way of to introduce the voice through the kind of cultural capital that the curators and the organization that commissioned me had. But this was actually censored, so it never happened. It was never shown in the conference, but it was shown in an exhibition there. But actually one of the potatoes was then cast in bronze and became a prize for the best employer in the agricultural sector, which is yet to find an owner because there's a lot to be done. So so that was just to introduce another strand in my work, which is to do with labor issues and the rights of workers and what can be done and how you could sort of, use art as well in this other context, not just as a representation of some issue, which I find is also important, but also having this kind of quite functional role of introducing maybe voices that are suppressed or having another role beyond the image itself. I think we run out of time now because I've been talking for a very long time. It's been quite weird because normally I'm used to seeing people that I talk to. So just talking to a mic and my computer, it was a bit awkward. But I just wanted to thank you all for tuning in and listening. And I hope you're all well. And I wish you all the best. I hope you take care and stay safe and healthy. And take this opportunity to stop and rethink all the things you took for granted, which is what I will be doing.